You say you'll never change your life until you change what you do daily.
Yes.
The secret of your success is determined by your daily agenda. I'd love to know, what do you do daily that helps you impact lives and build your organization the way you do? What are some of your daily disciplines that are most helpful?
Well, I love that question, and I do believe this. I believe that we overestimate what we can do tomorrow.
Right.
And I think we over-exaggerate what we did yesterday. And I think especially when you're old like me, you sit there and, the good old days, I don't think the good old days were always that good. You know what I mean? But I do think, in fact, I know, we underestimate today. Mm-hmm. And it's the only moment I have. All I have is now. The only time I have. And that's why I tell people consistently, you have to live in the present. Be there. Be present. Whatever you're doing, do it well right now. So in my disciplines to make the day count, I have my spiritual disciplines of things that I do in my faith walk that I do on a daily basis. I pray scripture. I have my writing disciplines. I write always in the morning. In fact, one of my disciplines is that basically I don't meet with anybody until noon, because I'm a morning person. I get up around 4:30 in the morning, and from 4:30 till about 10:30, 11, I am cooking. I mean, that's when I think best. That's when I write best. And I learned a long time ago. Now, you may be a night person, so you might flip that. But whenever you're at your best mentally, physically, that's when you ought to be doing your most important things and making that really count right then. But, who was it? I think Joe Frazier, the boxing champion, said that when you get into the ring, it shows up if you practiced or not, and if you worked out. And what we do in secret will be revealed in public, right. And it's only a matter of time. And one other quick thought on this is I think that consistency is such an incredible asset to people that is totally underappreciated. Because consistency compounds. I'm 73, and I can tell you right now, the consistency of my life now is bringing fruit to my life that I'm surprised, and I think, how is this happening? But it's because of this continual day in, day out, teaching leadership to so many people. And after a while, all of a sudden, this return comes back that I would have never anticipated. So today, which we say is just today, doesn't seem so great. Several todays consistently done with the right reasons and the right priorities. One day shows up. And, hey, today, someday becomes what a day. Right. It comes, oh my gosh, what a day we've got here. Well, that day out there that we graduate from college or we get the promotion, that, when somebody graduates from college, everybody's congratulating them. Well, they didn't become successful when they got their diploma. They became successful when they enrolled in college and when they studied for the test and when they went to class. I mean, right. They're already successful. And I think sometimes we confuse success, which is required of us on a daily basis, with recognition of success. Right. Which that doesn't happen till someplace back there. We weren't that good when we got recognized, and we weren't that bad when we did the routine stuff that we needed to do to get recognized.
Yeah. I think that's so important, and I just kind of even want to highlight that for someone who's listening right now.
Yes.
That success isn't when you get the promotion or the book deal or launch your company or get acknowledged or get published or whatever. Success is when you're faithful today in doing the small things. And along your line of saying overestimating, underestimating, I had a mentor years ago, John, tell me that something very similar, but he said that you'll typically overestimate what you can do in the short run.
Yes.
And then he said, but you'll vastly underestimate what you can do through a lifetime of faithfulness. Question. And that's what you're talking about. I like the idea of consistency compounds. It's so true.
I was doing a leadership conference one time, and we were having a great day. There were a couple thousand people there. I was in my last break, and I was signing some books, and a kid who was just getting his MBA came up to me. He was so excited. He said, "Oh man, I love this." He said, "I've decided I want to do what you do." And I said, "Well, that's great." I said, I have a question for you. So what's that? He's so eager. I said, "Would you like to do what I did?"
Right.
so you can do what I do. See, the issue is not I want to do what you do. Everybody wants to do what somebody that's doing something really amazing does. I tell them, forget I want to do what you do and go to, well, am I willing to did what you did? You got to get in the did world before you can get into the do world. Yep. And so we had a nice conversation, but I think so many times we see the success of somebody and we kind of gravitate like, oh, I want to do that, not realizing there was a whole process of daily disciplines that got them there, and without those, they would have never had that day.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine somebody listening now, just they're in the didding part.
Yeah,
you got to did so you can do.
Yeah, and I tell them if they don't do the did, they're in deep doo-doo. This last year, I had a great experience. I was able to play Augusta, this incredible golf course, with Lou Holtz, who is known in the sports world as a very successful college football coach. And although the golf was great at Augusta, what was really great was the evening sessions after dinner back in the cabin. And one night I got on a conversation with Lou Holtz because he coached 6 university teams, of which all 6 of them, when he took over as coach, had a losing record the year before. All 6. And within 2 years of him being the coach, all 6 of those that had a losing record, he not only turned it around, but within 2 years of him coaching these teams, they were in some kind of a college bowl game. And I call that a U-turn leader. A U-turn leader is they take something that's going down, and then they flatten it out. They kill that negative momentum and they get it going, and then they bring it back at the top and they get positive momentum. That's a U-turn kind of leader. And to do that kind of a thing, you have to create positive change. Remember this, you can't turn anything around without changing it. Nobody ever said, I'll tell you why I was so successful. I took something that was not doing well and did nothing. I just did nothing. I just said, time will heal us. And 27 years later, we kind of turned around. No. Let me tell you something. Everything that's bad in your life will never be fixed until you change something about it. Everything bad in your organization will never be fixed until there is a change. Change is the indispensable link to turning things around, to testing and proving that you're a good leader. If you and I take over something that's doing well and has momentum, to be honest with you, we don't have to be a leader very well. We just almost have to just kind of carry the baton in front of the group and just kind of run ahead and stay ahead of the group. But when it's going wrong, when it's going down, that's the test of a leader. What do you take that's not working, stop that negative momentum, and then turn it around and give it. If you turn it around, it's always because you produced positive change within the organization. So let me give you 3 or 4 quickly change comments. Number 1, people feel awkward and self-conscious when they have to make changes, when they're doing something new. It's just there's an awkwardness about that. We all feel awkward. And so whenever you're trying to create positive change, you're making people do something they don't want to do. I literally talked to a guy one time, and I was talking about changes in the organization. And he said, well, I know we've gone through some changes in the organization, but I just can't recall them right now. And I said to myself, you haven't gone through real changes in the organization because there's nothing but pain in those. You know what I mean? You remember them well. Oh, my gosh, do you remember when we had to go? Are you with me? Yes. So it's always awkward. Do me a favor, drop your pen for a moment and just clasp your hands like this, would you please? That's just like this. Okay, you got it? Everybody got their hand clasped? That's really good. Now, let me tell you something about what you just did. You've done this thousands of times. Let me tell you what you've never done. Move your fingers over one and clasp them. Feel how awkward that is? You know why it's awkward? You've never clasped your hands like that until right now. You're comfortable doing things the same way. Fold your arms for me. Just fold your arms. That's beautiful. You've done it thousands of times. Now change the way you fold your arms. Feel how awkward that is? You know why it's awkward? You've never done it that way before. Now, they're both folded arms. They're both clasped hands. They're both the same thing. But you've never done one, and so therefore it's uncomfortable to you. Here's what I know. Most people are more comfortable with old problems than they are with new solutions. That's what I know. So therefore, people want to stay in the old problems. If you're going to be a U-turn leader and create positive change, you're going to have to get them to cross their arms differently. You're going to have to get them to clasp their hands differently. The second thought on change is that people initially focus on what they're going to lose or give up when they have to do change. When you ask people to change, the first thing they think about is not what they're going to receive, new and fresh and different and beautiful. They think about what they're going to have to give up. That's why they dig in. The first question a person asks when there's change is, how's this going to affect me? What's this mean to me? What am I going to have to do? What am I going to have to do in that process? Because I know these two things about change, I can still remember when I was 27 and I had to lead my first congregation through a multi-million-dollar building program. And I was way over my head. And I can still remember spending days trying to figure out, how do I take a congregation that people vote on change, including multi-million-dollar building programs, and as a 27-year-old kid, convince them to build this big building and millions of dollars. How do I do that? And I did that. This worked when I was 27. I did this. So I developed a strategy I'm going to give you right now called Plan Ahead. And this is how to navigate successful change. And can I tell you something? I wrote this down at 27. I followed it. I follow today. It really works. The letter P. Predetermine the change that's needed. The first thing you want to do is you want to sit down and you want to predetermine what is the change that's needed in my life. Because if you're going to turn something around, change has to happen. Now, you don't want action without understanding what you're wanting. So your whole goal isn't to go in and change something. Your goal is to change something that matters, that works. So only you as a leader can predetermine what that change needs to look like. And the way you do it is basically say, this is what is. I mean, hey, Lou Holt said, I have a losing team. I want to have a winning team. What's it mean to take a losing team and make them a winning team? I asked him that process. And Lou told me, he said, John, I asked the players that were on the team that were coming back, why do you think you lost so many games last year? He said, what I did is I did two things. I listened to everybody that was in that losing environment. I asked a lot of questions until I figured out what the issues were. And then he said that great statement, how does a leader that doesn't ask questions ever figure out what to do? I love that. If you're not asking questions of your people, you don't have a clue where they are. You don't have a clue what they think. And he said, I just asked questions. Arthur Blank, when he bought the Atlanta Falcons, told me the very same thing. He said, John, I just went out on the street and I just asked the fans, tell me, why don't you go to the Falcons games? They said, because they stink. They're not any good. Prices are too high. Food costs too much. He said, I just got all those lists of, and he said, here's what these leaders know. The answers to the questions you ask will be the strategy that you implement to make the change. The strategy is within the people, but nobody's extracted it out of them. So you got to predetermine. You got to predetermine the change that is needed. And I think you do that by finding out where the people are, asking the question. After a while, you got it. The picture begins to be clear. The letter A, lay out your steps. Now, I've got to lay out my steps to bring people through successful change. If I walk close to the people through this change, I'll be their leader. If I walk far ahead of the people in this change, I'll become a martyr. You don't want to be a martyr. The good news is if you die a martyr's death, you're always special in the hearts of people. Bad news is you're dead. That's just not a good thing. You with me? So you got to do what I call the leadership dance. This is the leadership dance. You can call me the Arthur Murray of leadership. Okay? Here's the leadership dance. This is the way this works. You got to walk ahead of them so they can see where they got to go. But you got to be close to them. Don't be walking far ahead of them. You with me? Yes. Close enough so they can see. You got to walk beside them so they can participate with you in the journey, so that you can listen and you can interact and you can take this journey together. They're in the seat beside you. And you got to walk behind them so that you watch the people that you empower. And the leadership dance is doing all three of those things at the same time. You walk ahead as an example. You walk beside as a friend. You walk behind as a leader that empowers. And once you can do those three things and mix it up with the people, you're laying out your steps very well. The letter A is adjust your priorities. Very simple. Whenever you're going through change, there's no such thing as a pre-game plan that you actualize out completely. Let me tell you the difference between a manager and a leader. A manager is a person who took plan A and won't get off of it because he doesn't want it to change on him. He's got the plan out. He's got the strategy out. Don't mess with it. This is the strategy. Here, stay right here. Let me tell you, a leader. A leader starts plan A because he knows you have to have a plan. But he, at any moment, is ready to change to plan B because he's found out a better way. If you think you get the answers on the front end, you've not led very much. Your answers come in the leadership itself, not in the front end. That's why plan A never ends up plan A. It's plan B or plan C. Why? Because you adjust and you hear and you listen and you, hey, by the way, you seize that opportunity. Remember, the great coaches are great because they make halftime adjustments. That pre-game plan at halftime has to be revisited. And you have to say, okay, what works? What doesn't work? And the changes you make have to be critical changes, not cosmetic changes. Remember this, cosmetic changes are easy to accept and implement. So people like cosmetic changes. They change the color. They change the number a little bit. And they just love that kind of stuff. It always kind of bugs me a little bit because I sit there and say, and, where are you going with it? Where are you going? Outside they like gray better than black. Okay. What else are we going to do? Okay. And so you want to make critical changes. You don't want to make cosmetic changes. And understand this. As you make these changes, there's always an answer. Don't ever get into that scarcity mindset as a leader that if I go this path, there's no answer down to this path. There's always an answer. And there's usually more than one answer. That's why leadership is such a great art. Leadership is such a great art because you begin to understand that as you lead them, as you journey, you give them the best leadership. And that's why trust is essential in the people with you. That's why trust is essential, so that you can make these changes as you go to get them there. Okay. And the next one is notify your key personnel. Sit down when you're going through changes, and there are two kinds of key people you need to notify. You need to notify your influencers. These are the people that they better say yes because you're not going to get it done without their yes. Their approval is essential. Are you with me? So you got to notify up front the influencers, and you got to notify up front the implementers. They're the ones. Hey, they're the ones that are going to make the dream come true. So you got to get the permission of the influencers for the plan to fly, but then you got to get your implementers because they're going to work the plan. So you notify key personnel. Then you allow time for acceptance. Now you sit down with your key people and you allow them to have time to accept where you're going. Now, this is where leadership art is at its highest form, because your only intuition and timing are a result of a leadership gift, or they're a result of giftedness. Whatever you're gifted in, you understand timing and intuition. If you're not gifted in it, you don't have timing or intuition going for you at all. So you're intuitive in your giftedness. Your ability to do timing is in your giftedness. So this allowing time for acceptance, this is where you begin to allow people to have the time that they need to move forward with you. And to do that, you have to, first of all, slow down. And when I say slow down, this is something I've always had a problem with. I'm dealing with one of my weaknesses now. I don't slow down well. When I see it, I'm gone. And then I realize, ooh, I got to take people with me. So I come back to get you. But when I come back to get you, it's like, are you ready? And if I come back to get you and you're not ready, I got you. And I'll sometimes go again. And I have to really work hard on this slowing down process, okay? Because naturally I want to speed up. I don't like anything slow. There's not. I just I like to drive fast. Yeah, it's just I have a need for speed, okay? I have a need for speed, okay? And as a leader, what happens is you get too far out in front of your people. Right. Does that mean? And so you got to slow down. Second thing to do in this allowing time is you got to make sure you're clear in your communication. Because when they don't understand, people cannot follow what they do not understand. And so all communicators understand the value of clarity on the front end. So I travel a lot, and I brought this with me because I just love it. When you travel, you just find some funny things that are written. And these are signs in English from various parts of the world. For example, the dry cleaners in Bangkok. I love this. Drop your trousers here for the very best results. So a bunch of people in front of that dry cleaner's mooning the rest of the people. Hotel brochure in Italy. This hotel is renowned for its peace and solitude. In fact, crowds from all over the world flock here to enjoy its solitude. This is from a Tokyo hotel. It is forbidden to steal hotel towels. Please, if you're not a person to do such a thing, then please do not read this. In Bucharest hotel lobby, the lift is being fixed for the next day. During that time, we regret that you will be unbearable. Hotel in Athens. Visitors are expected to complain at the office between the hours of 9 and 11 o'clock daily. Is it complaining time yet? Is it? In a Rome laundry, ladies, leave your clothes here and spend the afternoon having a good time. Outside a Hong Kong tailor shop, ladies may have a fit upstairs. In a Rhodes tailor shop, order your summer suits. Because it's a big rush, we will execute customers in strict rotation. Bang! Next. In Copenhagen, an airline ticket office, we take your bags and send them in all directions. It's our gift. We'll just send them anywhere they are possibly. Make your communication clear. Head into action. The H is head into action. Get going. Just start going. You never know the level of commitment from your people until you ask for action. You just never know how committed they are. The letter E, expect problems. Expect them. Why? Because motion causes friction. You start moving. And it's a tremendous leadership mistake to think that you have such a plan that is problem-free. Okay? And that everybody will buy in. So what leaders need to do, this is so beautiful. It's so negative, but it's so good. when I say expect problems this whole process, here's what you got to do as a leader. You got to think the worst first. You got to think the worst before anyone else. You got to speak the worst first. And you got to answer the worst first. You got to do all three of those things. In other words, you got to think what problems are going to be there. And then when you figure out what problems are going to be there, you say, now as we do this, there are a whole bunch of problems we're going to encounter. When you speak it up to the people, they'll say, oh my gosh, he's already figured out that we got, hey, and let me tell you, when those problems occur, let me tell you what we're going to do. When you can do that well, understand you're really helping them with positive change. And the next one is always point to your successes. Somebody said, why? I said, because you always have people point to your failures. I mean, some people, that's their spiritual gift. You understand. If they can't find criticism, they're just not very comfortable. And then daily review your progress. Daily review your progress. Why? Because things get off on a daily basis. Things get off course on a daily basis. Problems occur on a daily basis. And I close this section of creating positive change, which is the acid test of leader. I close this because of the 21 irrefutable laws of leadership. I have what I call the law of buy-in. And the law of buy-in, I think, answers this whole process of creating positive change within an organization. The law of buy-in just simply says people buy into the leader before they buy into the vision. And so what I want you to understand is when people say, can I create positive change within the organization? Can I do a U-turn? Can I turn this around? The question is very simple. How much of the people bought into you? If they bought into you, you can turn it around. Just think as I close of the story I gave you of Lou Holtz that turned 6 university programs around. Losing programs within 2 years had him in college bowls. Think of what happened about the 5th college he went to with a reputation of a turnaround U-turn leader. Can you imagine just the excitement and the momentum of Lou Holtz coming to our college? You know, we just stink. And he's going to come here and he's going to turn us into winners. Okay. Now let me tell you something. It's a phenomenal thing when you have your reputation that you're a problem solver, and it's a phenomenal thing when you have a reputation that you turn things going the wrong way around and you make them positive. Once you get that, this is a leadership edge that you have. It's a leadership edge. It gives you a sense of momentum. It gives you a sense of moral authority that allows you to come back into a situation and where, now here's what I learned a long time ago. When people believe the best in you as a leader, they give their best to you as a leader. So you want to become good at this session because this is the area that once you can do it and you can do it well, you kind of get a reputation as a turnaround artist, a U-turn leader that creates positive change, and then all kind of very good and exciting things happen. Let's talk about transformation. Let's talk about changing our world. I was 17 years of age when I really established my relationship with God. I was going to school a couple days later on a Friday morning, and I read a passage in Corinthians that said, if we are in Christ, we become a new creation. Old things pass away, behold, all things become new. And it was at that moment, as a teenager, a young Christian, I realized that my life had been transformed. And I went to school that day as a transformation carrier. I was carrying the message of the good news of what God had done in my life. And I can tell you that throughout my years, this desire to see people know God, have their life incredibly positively changed, has just increased. And the process was very simple. In the beginning, I just wanted to make a difference. If you come up to me as a young person, I'd say, I just want to make a difference. I didn't know how I was going to make a difference. I didn't know when I was going to make a difference. I didn't even sometimes know why I wanted to make a difference, but I just knew I wanted to make my life count. And over the years, I have found that desire to make my life count, add value to people, see lives be changed, absolutely increase. And that's what the teaching's about today. The teaching about today is transforming in our own life and transformation in the life of others. Let me just ask you this question. How many of you As you look now, 2021 in front of us, how many of you would like to improve your life this year? Let's just do a little poll here. Okay, looks pretty good to me. Let me ask you another question. How many of you would like to see the person that you're sitting beside have their life greatly improved this year? I mean, now let me just say something. You were more eager on question 2. The excitement level on question 2 was a little bit higher pitched than on level 1. Well, we're going to talk about how we do it. And we have choices. When we don't like what's happening, we have one of two choices. We can either curse the darkness or we can turn on the light. And what we need to understand is that cursing the darkness improves no one's life. But if we turn on the light, all of a sudden we have a way that we can bring incredible, beautiful life change to other people. And I want to encourage us in this teaching today to turn on the light. And as I talk about changing your world, I'm not the first one to talk about it. Jesus, in Matthew chapter 5, basically taught a change your world message. Let's look at the scripture, okay? Let's dive into it. It's on the screen. Jesus starts off in his teaching by saying, let me tell you why you're here. Let's stop right there. A lot of people come to me and they say, John, I would really like to know what God's purpose is for me in my life. I would really like to know what God's will for me in my life. And I say, well, you know, it's quite simple. Jesus kind of set that straight at the beginning of his ministry. Let me tell you why you're here. Let me tell you why you are on earth. And now he begins to explain. You're here to be salt seasoning that brings out the God flavors of this earth. If you lose your saltiness, how will people taste godliness? You've lost your usefulness and will end up in the garbage. Now, he emphasizes again. Here we go. Here's another way to put it. In other words, if you don't understand salt, let me share it with you another thing. You're here to be light, bringing out the God colors in the world. God is not a secret to be kept. We're going public with this, as public as a city on a hill. If I make you light bearers, you don't think I'm going to hide you under a bucket, do you? I'm putting you on a light stand. And now that I put you there, on the hilltop, on a light stand, shine. Keep open house, be generous with your lives. Oh, this is a huge verse. By opening up to others, you'll prompt people to open up with God, this generous Father in heaven. Jesus basically said that we change our world by being salt, which makes things better, and light, which makes things brighter. In other words, we are to be catalytic in helping people find God. Now, when we begin to understand our responsibility to be catalysts for change, the first thing that we understand is the fact that there are a lot of people who don't want to change. Would you agree with that? How many of you know people who they're just kind of stuck in the mud? I mean, and I'm going to ask the question. You know it's coming, don't you? How many of you are sitting beside that person right now? Okay, don't go there. Just trust me. Don't go there. As I think about change, the reason people don't like it is because it's uncomfortable. It gets them out of their comfort zone. By the way, in COVID-19, as I've shared this year, I've done a lot of virtual teaching. I've done more teaching this year than I've ever done, to more people than I've ever done. And one of the things I shared with them with this year that we've just gone through is that a crisis is a detour. In other words, what a crisis is it takes us out of our rhythm and out of our way of doing things. And all of a sudden, the way that we're familiar with, the way that we understand, the way that we appreciate is taken from us, and we're now going a different way. It's a detour. And in fact, I've been encouraging everybody, enjoy the detour tour. And the reason you want to enjoy it is because you're seeing things that you've never seen before. You're going places you've never been before. You're experiencing things you never experienced before. And this is where the learning and the growing of life becomes. So take the tour. And here's the statement. Everything that you want or need, but you don't have. Stay with me. Everything that you want or you need, but you don't have it, it's outside of your comfort zone. That's why you don't have it. If it was in your comfort zone, you'd already have it. You would say, oh my gosh, I need that, so I'm going to go get it, and you take it and you move on. The only reason that we don't get it is because it's out of our comfort zone. And what's so beautiful is people are out of their comfort zone right now. They're all on the detour tour, whether they want to be or not. And it's an incredible time for transformation, and here's why. Because when people are hurting, that's when they're willing to make their most important changes in life. Okay, this is going to be a little weird to some of you, but I think Christians grieve way too much when adversity comes. I don't really understand it, but I watch us and we put our hopes in the wrong people and the wrong things, and I can promise you right now that adversity is a friend to Christianity. Church history tells us this. And when I watch Christians say, boy, I just, wow, this will be taken from us, we're going to lose this, I look in there and I say, excuse me, I thought that we were pilgrims in this world. I just had a misunderstanding. I didn't know that this is where we were going to live eternally. I just thought this is where we're passing through. But let's talk about being comfortable or not being comfortable. Just do me a favor right now, quickly, just cross your arms, okay? Everybody just cross your arms, okay? Now, we've done this thousands of times, haven't we? And let me just say something. Every time you cross your arms, you do it the same way. Every time. You know you've done this thousands of times and you have never done it the other way. Okay, let's do it the other way. Feels so uncomfortable, doesn't it? I mean, this certainly can't be the right way. No. Hey, clasp your hands. Clasp your hands with me, okay? Good. Now, every time you clasp your hands, you do it the same way. Every time. You've done this 10,000 times. Every time you do it the same way. You've never done it the other way, but you can clasp your hands. Just move one finger over and let's do it again. Oh. Doesn't it feel uncomfortable? I'm not sure that you can pray with your hands clasped like this. I'm not even sure God can hear your prayer. Come on, let's get it back to the way it's supposed to be. Let's go get it back to the right way. Now, I say that because people change in 4 different seasons. This is a whole leadership talk, okay, that I can do for about 2 hours, but because you're so smart, I'm going to do it in 1 minute. Honest to God. If I was with most congregations, this would be a series. But you're just smarter. Okay, here we go. People change when they hurt enough they have to, when they see enough they're inspired to, when they learn enough that they want to, and when they receive enough that they're able to. Those are the 4 times that people change. And I want to talk to you about just one of them, the hurting enough that you have to. 1 year ago, if we would have been at Christ Fellowship, there would have been nobody wearing masks. We would have been looking at 2020, and we would have never envisioned all the things that we've had happen to us. I call 2020 the shock and numb year. We've been surprised at what we've seen, and then we've seen so much and been so much out of our comfort zone that we're just kind of numb to about everything. But what I want you to grapple with today in being a transformational catalyst is the fact that in hurting times, this is a very opportune time for you to really make a difference. One of the negatives that have come out of all of this is the fact that there has been a decline in trust. I call it the trust fall. I put some stats on the screen. In 1964, 77% of Americans trusted in the federal government. 30 years later, only 20% do. And I know we think, well, you got Vietnam, you got Watergate. Of course, you got all kinds of things that we could point to, but I can tell you it's deeper than that. It's deeper than that. I'll come back to that. In 2014, 70% of the people believe that most people can't be trusted. You see, what happens is when we lose our way with values, I'll come back to this. When we lose our way with values, all of a sudden, trust begins to fall. First in institutions, then in people. As I've traveled the world, the difference between countries and cultures that do well and countries and cultures that don't do well is what I call the trust factor. In fact, I want it to be put on your screen so you can visually see it for a moment. Social trust is the confidence that other people will do what they ought to do most of the time. Trust becomes a very vibrant factor that people thrive in when people do what they ought to do. And the word ought catches my attention because where did they get their ought? Where did they get their ought? That they do what they ought to do. They got it from learning and living good values. Trust is the environment where people thrive and do well. Now, this is essential. So we ask ourselves, okay, if we're going to see transformation, if we're going to change our world, let's go a step farther. How do we create an environment of trust? It's essential in families. It's essential in communities. It's essential in business. Trust needs to be the core, the center, the fabric of any culture.
I tell you, of all the lessons John does, there's so many of them where I feel the same way I feel today. He practices what he teaches. He is a practitioner. I have sat on planes. I have been in probably more hotels, been in more cities around the world with John, in every kind of setting, every kind of environment. And I can tell you this, he believes in the power of sustained thinking. He believes that thinking has changed his life, and we believe thinking will change your life. I'm so glad, Tracy, that you're back. I'm reminded today, coming out of John's lesson, of Voltaire's quote. It says, "No problem can withstand the assault of sustained thinking." I love that statement. I don't know if it's the word assault, which is like, I want to go after accomplishing something big, but I love that truly with thinking, we can make a difference. And with sustained thinking, we can change many of the things in our life. So Tracy, welcome back. Glad you're on the podcast. What a great lesson, right?
This is a great lesson, and I think it is going to detangle a lot of people from negative thinking, patterns of thinking. I know it did for me. The first time I heard John talk about this, it was like, and if you can't see me, if you're just listening, I'm like showing my head exploding. This was like mind-boggling because I thought there were either positive thinkers and positive thoughts and positive beliefs, and then there were negative thinkers and negative thoughts and negative beliefs. I guess I just had to learn that I really could control what I thought about based on what I nurtured. And when John talked about, our thoughts really inform our beliefs. Like what we believe is what we spend time thinking about. So if we have spent time thinking something for a long time about ourselves, maybe we've come into agreement with something that someone told us when we were young over and over and over again. And we are just in the habit of saying, I'm this, I do this, this is how I am. And that we've come into agreement with that, so we believe it now. And we can actually go back and say, well, we are that way because that's how we thought about ourselves. And so now we believe it. But if we now think a different way, we can believe something else about ourselves and then we'll act differently. That really was mind blowing for me because in my 20s, even in my 30s, and even now in my 50s, there are still things that I am assessing. What do I think about that informs my belief? And so, Mark, I'm curious about you, kind of looking back at your 20s and then honestly now in your 50s, a very, very young
Yes, thank
50s.
you. Thank you.
You're welcome. So in your 20s, clearly, were you somebody who had to detangle from what you thought about yourself in your 20s, that you had to change the way you thought about yourself to change your beliefs about yourself? And now in your 50s, even in this role now, are you still having to practice exercises of what you think about yourself in this new position, in this new huge role that you are carrying now in Maxwell Leadership, of carrying his life's work into the next generation of leaders. It is so awesome, but it's also a huge responsibility. Are you still 50-something-year-old you having to work on your thoughts to inform a new belief about you?
Yeah, the answer is absolutely. It's interesting, and I hope this part of our podcast will be helpful to many. I wish I knew a little bit more of the science behind the paradigms that we have and the impressions that we receive when we're up to 5, 6, 7, 8. Science tells us that most of our thinking, our personality is created in those formative years. And then the rest of our life, we spend building on those paradigms, or we spend trying to debunk them. And it's probably yes and for both of those, that we really go back to. I know for me, I grew up in a very generous, very people servant environment. And there are times that I need to be thinking about the future and leading, as John Maxwell talks about. And I go back to wanting to win a popularity contest, rather than wanting to win a productivity contest.
Yeah.
And I go back to that people-pleasing concept that I think was impressioned upon me early on. That's good and bad. It's neither one. And to be honest with you, it is what it is. So to answer your question about leading in my 20s and leading in my 50s, yes, I am constantly trying to rework my thoughts for today's challenges. Isn't that true for us that are now leading past COVID? It was alarming in late 2020, the number of CEOs and top executives that was leaving corporate communities around the world, specifically in America. I mean, I think I saw a stat one time that over 1,700 of the Fortune 5,000 companies changed top senior leadership in the first 6 to 18 months of COVID. Wow. And it's staggering because it was causing us to have to rethink how we do business, how we motivate people. Well, then there's others of us, many of you listening to the podcast now, to where you were leading before COVID, you led through COVID, you're leading after COVID. And I have to tell you, even today, just before coming into studio, I was having to rethink leadership post-pandemic, post-COVID, because we now are leading different. We now think different. The social interaction of people has been shaped by 2 years of a pandemic. So yes is your short answer, Tracy, to say I am rethinking leadership. Between my 20s and 50s, I'm thinking differently. Between being the CEO and now the owner/CEO, I'm thinking different. By the way, I'm having to think different today than I did yesterday. I think this evolving of thinking is a reality, and I think we've got to evolve even faster than any of our predecessors had to evolve. Here is the biggest thing, Tracy, that hit me. John's first point was everything begins with a thought. Everything begins with a thought. Mm-hmm. And I wrote down on my notes as I'm listening to John teach. I hope all of you listening and watching the podcast do the same thing. I wrote down this question: do I spend consistent time, and do I spend enough time thinking? If everything begins with a thought, everybody just stop what you're doing. If you're running on a treadmill, jump off real quick. If you're driving down the road, pull over real quick, because I got a question for you. If everything begins with a thought, when's the last time you've had focused think time in your schedule? We focus on health. I love it. We focus on relationship. I love it. We focus on the next meeting coming up, and thank you for preparing. We all appreciate it. But are you preparing your future? Are you preparing the envisioned and excitable future of yours by focused thought time? I'm going to tell you, as I asked myself that question while John was teaching, I was not really excited about some of my answer there, and determined after this podcast to do better about scheduling think time.
I'm taking notes as you say that, because I'm thinking this is an action-packed world.
Yeah.
And we even in Maxwell Leadership talk so much on this podcast about being action-oriented. And so many of us pause too long and we wait too long to jump into the leadership game. But at the same time, you know, that what Ralph Waldo Emerson quote that he gave, life consists of what a man is thinking about all day. There is a running narrative in all of our minds that is playing and that we are listening to without even really thinking about. And so how are we making thinking time a priority? And if we are or aren't, are we thinking that's inactivity? Are we thinking, like, are we just really taking the time to spend time thinking? Because what we are thinking about determines, his next line, who we are. And so I just want to say to our listeners, if you are a parent, there is, you know, Mark just said, and I wrote the note, what he said, because it was powerful. He said his thinking is constantly evolving, but there are some things that are timeless, that don't evolve. There are very few things that don't evolve, you know, principles and laws of leadership. But then a lot of the styles and the way that we operate in those laws, those principles and laws, those are moving all the time in how we apply them. But there are some things that don't change. But with social media, they're kind of playing with the laws. They play with the things that aren't supposed to kind of move, some in some spaces. And so as parents, it's really important that we don't keep so active in busy work that we don't forget to monitor because our thinking determines what we believe, what our kids are listening to. Because John said, what we think determines who we are, and who we are determines what we do. So if our kids are listening to all this crazy wild array of different people, it means who we listen to matters. Because if what we listen to determines what we think, and what we think determines who we are and what we believe, we need to be really careful about who our kids and who we are listening to. And so I just want to say hats off to you, for those of you, so many of you who say, my kids, we listen to this podcast together on our way to school. We listen to this podcast while we're commuting home from work and school and daycare and whatever. This is playing in the car. This is playing in our home. I love that because it's starting so young.
Yeah, you know, as you were talking there, I went to that point that John made. What we think determines who we are. I was recently with John traveling, and I asked him, he had a big speaking day the next day. They had changed a last minute request on what they wanted to communicate, and it needed to be fresh. And we had this full day planned to where we were very busy. And I watched John be fully in the moment. He was just in the moment. And I said, John, if I had your load tomorrow, and if I had a new idea in front of new people that I had to communicate tomorrow, it would be constantly on my mind now. I don't know how to get my thinking under control to be present in the moment and yet be aware that tomorrow is a moment that people are depending on me to be prepared. And I said, how do you do it? And we talked for a few minutes about it, and it was wonderful. That night at dinner, as he does often, he come loaded with bear to answer my question and spoke into me in a way. I won't take this podcast time to talk about that conversation, but I will, because it will go down in one of the top 5 conversations I've ever had with John. Both of us in tears. He saw deep into my heart that night. Because I was real vulnerable with him, saying, my thinking is still like it used to be, that I have to perform tomorrow for these people, rather than taking in the moment of today and sharing from today what tomorrow looks like. I wanted to share from preparation rather than experience. And John said, do you not know that you will connect with people greater when you are in the moment of your experience more than you are in the moment of your preparation? And Tracy, I sit there and I just went, man, I want to be synonymous with my thoughts. And then as soon as that word comes out of my mouth, guys, I go, oh, no, I don't. I don't like some of the negative thinking that I have to get control of to then live my life. And yet John is saying, whether you know it or not, leadership, podcast listeners, whether you know it or not, viewers, you are the sum of your thoughts. It is your thoughts are showing up in your behaviors, and most of us don't even know it. And then John began to communicate what he saw in me, and he said, Mark, what I see in you very rarely comes out in what you see in yourself. And he said, it's not because it's not true, it's because you are thinking incorrectly, and that's what's coming out of your mouth rather than what is. Tracy, it was brilliant in the need for us to get our thoughts in line with who we want to be, because whether we like it or not, we're going to be affected by our thinking.
And that shows, boy, that really spoke to me too, because it shows that we are always, that narrative that's talking inside, that sometimes it's negative and we're having to fight against it. And so when John said getting lost in the experience rather than in your preparation, the more preparation we do, spending time in our thoughts, and that preparation will show up when you're present in that experience. Whereas if you hadn't done the preparation, the experience might have been a little more tainted because you hadn't processed through your natural thoughts that you don't want to live in. And so I love that. I hope that comes up again, and that you can dive a little bit more deeper in. And you know, John always talks about layered learning. I hope that you can bring that up again and dive in a little bit more for us, because I know for me, that's a great lesson.
Let me do that at your invitation right now, because on point number four, John says people who go to the top think differently than others.
Right.
Now, I know that my ascent to promotion in John Maxwell's organization, I know I was constantly going, I can get that done. I can do that. I would look at the people around me and I would go, I can do that. I feel like I can do that a little better. Not to be better than them, but I can learn from them and produce better because I'm in a state of learning. Right. And there was this constant assessment that I would do about production, discipline, work ethic, that on the trajectory, on the journey to the summit, caused me to think more positively than being on the summit and either deserving it or staying on the summit.
Yes.
So leaders, here is the point. We absolutely need to think differently as we move through life. It goes back to Tracy's first point. Do we need to be different in our thinkers? Do we think different as a 50-year-old than a 20-year-old? Yes, 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 yes. Do I think differently today rather than I did 2 years ago? Yes, 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 yes. But if the difference is an outlook, like if you get to the top of your game and then start looking over your shoulder or behind your back in fear, when all you did in the ascent was look forward in positivity and absolute belief that you could do it, you've changed the perspective, and you're not a negative person, but you've become negative because your thinking has changed based on your position of success.
Yes.
And what John is saying before he goes to the last point that we can change our thinking is this. People who get to the top think differently than others. Here's what that means. Do you believe you can get to the top? I hope your answer is yes. We're putting a lot of podcasts. We're over 19 million downloads now. We're getting ready to get close to our 200th episode. I hope we have helped you believe you can get to the top. Here's my other question. Do you believe when you get to the top, you'll see the next summit, or do you think that's the finish line? That's a thought. Do you think when you get to the top, now all everybody wants to do is to pull you down to the bottom? That's a way of thinking. It's incredibly important that we do adapt our thoughts, but it's just as important that we don't shape our attitude to be different just because we have arrived or we believe we can never arrive. And that attitude with which our thoughts are formed on is so important to leaders. And if we don't believe we'll ever get to the top, there's a 99% chance you'll never get to the top, because your thoughts shape who you are. But if we get to the top and all of a sudden we now change our attitude from one of gratitude or hunger and now one of entitlement and satisfaction, we've changed the whole foundation of our thought process, And we don't even understand that we've lost our effectiveness because our best days are behind us. And so, Tracy, I want to go back, and I do want to wrap it up, although I don't want to wrap it up. I never want to wrap it up. I want to go back to this concept that we can change the way we think. And first, I want to hear you just give a little thoughts on what you took away from John in that, because he taught a lot more after he made that point. And then maybe a way or two that you change your thinking, because I'm trying to learn right here, because there's some areas in full candor, which I always try to do that with these podcasts is full candor. I need to change my thinking in some areas. And so how do we do this? How do we do this change your thinking?
Well,
Commitment,
two things I'll say quickly. The first thing that he said really connected with me. And if you are somebody who is an empathetic person and an emotional person that's dealing with your emotions and your thinking, he said the number one challenge to thinking is going to be your feelings. Yeah. So if that really connected for you, then John is also an emotional person. I know Mark also has an emotional person that we're also trying to combat as we're trying to think our way through this. So John has given a tool that I think is so powerful. When you are dealing with a situation, he will say, you want to separate all of the parts of you. And you do that by asking yourself, what do I think? What do I feel? What do I know? And then what do I do? Because your brain kind of categorizes it all in the mush of you as what you know. So what you feel, you categorize as what you know. And so that's kind of like sorting out all of those things into different categories really does help you identify, what do I think about this? What do I feel about this? So that's two different things. What do I know is true? And you find that what you know is really a lot less because you feel a lot of more things than what you actually know in the situation. And then what should I do? Because he said, thoughts are a taxi. You get in and they take you where you want to go. And guess what, friends? If you are sitting in a taxi and you are stewing and brewing and having bad thoughts and you are believing things that you don't really know and you're identifying your feelings and your thoughts with beliefs, it was what you know, but you know, oh my goodness, this is actually just a feeling and I don't really know. Get out of that taxi and hail yourself another taxi. Yes. Bring in a new thought and bring in a new belief. And so that's kind of what I have taken John's advice to really try to work through that so that I can put on healthy thinking.
Well, and it's interesting that John said his first book, he said this in his teaching today, his first book back in 1989 was Think on These Things. You think about a life's work of 86 unique books, 119 derivatives of those 86 books. You think of 36 million hands have held a John Maxwell book. And you go, wow, all that started with the concept that you need to think differently to be successful. You need to think differently to make it about others. Think about that. Life's work began with this idea, think on these things.
In a moment, I'm going to talk about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who I would consider to be, in the last century, the greatest leader in the world. Not only in America, but the entire world, for the change that he brought. And for us to be in this historic place where he preached and shepherded a flock and was a pastor and a leader. And then we're especially honored to have his wife, Coretta Scott King and Bernice King, here with us. And I want to say one more thing before I launch into this lesson about Dr. King. This year I've had two highlights. In fact, recently somebody came to me and said, John, what have been your highlights this year? And it was so easy for me to tell them what it was because I really have had two highlights. I had the privilege on the day that we honor Dr. King as a holiday to be here at Ebenezer Baptist Church, and the family was so kind to ask me to come down with other speakers and take a few minutes to talk about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as a leader. It was a highlight. Place was packed out. The service was incredibly inspiring. And just to be able to stand with other people who have been great leaders, people who have stood with courageous stands for what is truly right, to be able to do that and to speak that day was an incredible honor. My first highlight was being able to honor him and spend a little bit of time with the family and the people on his holiday. Let's go to your notes. People are often led to causes and often become committed to great ideas through persons who personify those ideas. They have to find the embodiment of the idea in flesh and blood in order to commit themselves to it. And Martin Luther King Jr. was such a man. In James McGregor Burns' book on leadership, here's what he said. Leadership is leaders acting, as well as caring, inspiring, and persuading others to act for certain shared goals that represent the values, the wants and the needs, the aspirations and the expectations of themselves and the people that they represent. And the genius of leadership lies in the manner in which leaders care about, visualize, and act on their own and their followers' values and motivations. James McGregor Burns gives us 3 key points in that paragraph about leaders and about leadership. Number 1, leadership omits the use of coercive power. Doesn't need to if they're good leaders. Number 2, leaders have a bias for action. And number 3, leaders act with respect for the values of their people. When I read that statement and I read that paragraph, which basically gives these 3 points, that leadership omits the use of coercive power, leaders have a bias for action, and leaders act with respect for the values of their people, I thought immediately, the first time I ever read it, of Dr. Martin Luther King. Again, here was a leader who understood and did all 3 well. History has clearly demonstrated that especially effective leaders often tend to emerge during periods of great change. For every major turning point in American history, creative leaders, right for the times and uniquely suited to the task, assume the mantle of leadership. With time, history has judged all of these people to have been great leaders. I'm reminded when Dr. King received the 1964 Nobel Peace Prize that he said, history has thrust me into this position. Again, it's almost as if there's a higher calling to the great leaders to be at the right time, at the right place, appropriate to lead a nation through a crisis. Let me go on. After completing his college education, Martin Luther King Jr. could have pursued a career that might have been more financially promising than the ministry. He could have stayed in Boston, where living conditions for African Americans were better than those in the South, but he chose to return to Atlanta. I had an opportunity to live in the North because I had 1 or 2 jobs offered, he recalled, but I went back south mainly because I felt that there were great opportunities there to transform the section of the country into something rich. He said, I mean rich in spirit and beautiful. Perhaps Dr. King also went back home because he never got over the racial discrimination that he had experienced, or because he never forgot the injustice of being treated as anything less than a human being. And maybe he went back because of a vow that he made to his mother when still a youngster. You know, he told her, when I get to be a man, I'm going to hit this thing and I'm going to hit it hard. Mother, there is no such thing as one people being better than another. The Lord made all of us equal, and I'm going to see to that. How leaders create positive change. Number 1, the first thing that leaders do to create positive change is listen. Lead by being led. To quote Dr. King in 1958, he said, I neither started the protest nor suggested it. I simply responded to the call of the people for a spokesman. Let me give you the context of that statement. During Martin's second year in Montgomery, an incident occurred on a city bus that effectively ignited the American Civil Rights Movement. December 1st, 1955, Mrs. Rosa Parks, a 42-year-old tailor's assistant, was commanded by a bus driver to give up her seat to a white male passenger who had just boarded. Mrs. Parks simply said no. She knew that she was breaking the law, but she nevertheless refused to move. In response, the driver stopped the bus, called the police, and had her arrested. I don't really know why I wouldn't move, she later commented. There was no plot or plan at all. I was just tired. My feet hurt. as I began to study the life of Dr. King, it was interesting in those early days. He didn't run for office. He basically listened to the needs of the people. It was their desires to begin to place him up in a leadership position. It reminds me of the statements of Plato, who said, only those who do not seek power are qualified to hold it. Boy, isn't that a great statement. Wow, it's almost like if you want it, you shouldn't have it. And if you do want it and you get it, you're probably dangerous in the process. The desire for lifelong learning fosters an equally strong tendency to listen. Dr. King was a great listener. In fact, his mode of operation in leadership was, I listen and then I lead. How many times do we want to lead without listening? You see, as a leader, growth never stops. We never get to a position where we know it all, where we can say it all, where we can teach it all. He had a constant appetite to continue learning. So I put in your notes the 4 L's of a leader. And I believe that they're in this sequence. The first L is loving. You have to love people. The second L is listening. Because if you truly love them, you want to hear what they have to say. The third L is learning. Obviously, when you begin to listen, you begin to learn. And the last one is leading. When you love, listen, and learn, then you're qualified to lead. So how do leaders create positive change? Number 1 is listen. Lead by being led. Number 2, communicate. In other words, connect with others. Now, as you know, I love the subject of communication. And when you think of great speeches, I mean, if you go back into the late 1700s, the great speech is Patrick Henry. Give me liberty or give me death. If you go into the middle 1800s, the great speech is the Gettysburg Address. But if you go in the 1900s, the great speech is I Have a Dream. Why? Because he had the ability to communicate vision, as great leaders only have that ability. It's not in your notes. Listen to these thoughts. Interestingly enough, Martin's unique speaking ability was revealed at a very early age. As a child, he started following in his father's footsteps at the Ebenezer Baptist Church. Hello. You're sitting in the place right now where he could read the scripture and lead discussions in Sunday school and even preach to the congregation on occasion. And according to Daddy King, Martin held his audiences spellbound when he talked. In studying Dr. King's speeches, there are some keys, I think, to his speaking that I want to pass on to you, because as leaders, we're constantly wanting to communicate vision to our people. Number 1, he spoke in the simple and common language of the people. In other words, he was easy to understand. Or an expression I've used often in my trying to communicate, he put the cookies on the lower shelf. Everybody could have some. He spoke in simple and common language. Number 2, he shared stories of sacrifice and courage by the people. Number 3, he used biblical symbols and imagery. For example, he would talk about the David of truth, speaking of the movement, and he would speak of the Goliath of injustice, of the people that were oppressive in that time. Use biblical terms and symbols and imagery. Number 4, he told personal stories of people in the movement. The 5th key to Dr. King's speeches is that he used metaphors to express hope and courage. Metaphors like after seeing demonstrators assaulted in Birmingham with high-pressure water hoses, he pointed out that the police failed to realize that the protesters had a certain kind of fire that no water could put out. Man, it makes you just want to start marching, doesn't it? Huh? I mean, you can't sit still. He had this incredible ability to speak and communicate, cut right to the people's heart. Number 6, he repeated words until they became themes. His first national speech, give us the ballot. He continually said, just give us the ballot. Just give us the ballot. Give us a chance to vote. Of course, in his great speech, Let Freedom Ring, nearly a dozen times, in that I Have a Dream speech, he kept saying, let freedom ring, let freedom ring, let freedom ring. He used repetition well. And I stop here just for a moment because a little while ago when we were touring much of this wonderful, not only this facility here, but when we were over in the Keene Center and we were listening to the speeches. I mean, no matter what area you went into to listen to whatever speech he was using, he moved us. And I listen to it and I think, he just moves me. He moves my heart. Well, it's a picture of a leader. It's a picture of a leader who has a passion, but it's a picture of a leader who knows where his or her people are. It's a picture of somebody that can articulate and voice what the people deep down inside actually feel. He put words to their feelings. He put pictures to what they sensed and wanted to see.
I know if you're like me and Becky, we're sitting here wishing John would keep inspiring us to inspire change. There's a lot of change, Becky, that you and I are getting to lead through. We're getting to be defined in our leadership because some of the changes. You know, I'm reminded of Socrates' quote that says, the secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new. It's what John says. He says change is inevitable, but growth is optional. And Becky, a year ago, you and I, we sat down with each other and we said, you know what? The old is pretty good. Yesterday was really good. But boy, there is a brightness that's pulling us into the future. And have we not experienced some change over the last year?
We definitely have. And it's been quite a ride, and it's still quite a ride. I think it's amazing how we all get excited about change, talking about it, but then when it comes time to implement it, we find there's a few problems that we don't get excited about. And when you think of tackling these things, especially with change, why do you think we, as a leadership organization or any organization, why do you think it's so hard for us to actually move forward with that? I mean, I think myself in particular, it's easy to want to put off the hard things and want to tackle the easy things first.
Well, it's this thing that John talks about. Number one, change what needs to be changed, not what's easy. And we were talking right before we went live here, Becky, we were talking about this idea that for all of us, if you're a task person, and I'm not saying that I am or am not a task person, but I will tell you, I like to check some things off. I got my little boxes and I like to check them off. And so maybe that makes me a task person, but I think everybody likes a sense of accomplishment. I got that done. Let me move on to the next thing. And it's true that whether it's John or any of us that are teaching, we challenge people, don't get caught up in the trap of checking off the easy things and leaving to the last minute the most difficult things. And we say that a lot in responsibility or daily task. In change, it's even more of a warning that I want to sound, because if you try to change what's easy, you will never get to what's hard, because there's easy changes all around. We've got to work hard to get the changes that require the most energy, the changes that need to be done. We've got to really do a good job, Becky, in my opinion, to intentionally beginning to build that out, so that we can have the most energy to make those changes, no matter the difficulty of the task. It's about the importance or the priority of the task that we need to work toward, and when it comes to change.
It's true. And I love how he references the difference between a cosmetic change and a cultural change, because we're kind of living in that right now.
Yeah.
We had this beautiful cosmetic change of everything from branding to logos. And as much as we thought that was going to be the hard part, that's not the hard part. Like, that's actually the fun, beautiful part. When it came time to actually culturally embrace those things, even changing the language that we use, I think you and I are still getting used to some of the change in the cultural side.
Well, it is. And you know, it's true. I made a miscalculation as a leader in 2021. So in 2020, we all led through COVID and we really didn't know what we were doing. And most of us, we circled the wagons and we back to back, we faced the world, right? And we all kind of led like that. Well, in 2021, I began to say, okay, we're done circling the wagons. We're moving out to the promised land. Let's go to the frontier and we're going to make this thing happen. And I think we did. I really was pleased with 2021, but I popularized in our leadership team a statement at the beginning of 2021. And I said, hey, today is the best day you're going to feel about this direction, this change for the next 365 days. And we would laugh and we feel good about it. Well, I thought 2022 was coming and all the changes had been broadcast. And so now it was time to really run and have this hum and this just feeling of, wow, so this was what the difficulty of 2021 was. And the leadership miscalculation is that change takes longer and costs more than you ever anticipated. The leadership miscalculation is that while people said it and began to repeat it, actually doing it is different than saying it and repeating it. And I've found that in 2022, that the changes that we began to broadcast and popularize and cast vision for now 18, 24 months, really is now requiring more than language change. It's requiring behavioral change. And it's much harder to change behavior than it is language. Leaders, listen to that.
Yes.
It is much harder to change behavior than it is language. And Becky, you and I are getting to lead in some behavior change time.
Yes, there is. And that really is a reflection. I mean, John talks about disciplines all the time. Mark lives those disciplines every day. But I think that's where you go from even just behavior to those habits and disciplines, is that phrase that he talks about, inside out instead of outside in. It's easy to just repeat in one of our leadership meetings everything that Mark says, but to actually have that reflected in our language, our attitude, our culture, I think that's maybe the gauge that we start to look for as far as that inside out.
It is. You know, I'm intrigued. So John, he has so many good points in 2 and 3, but Becky, you just said something that sparked me to go to this remove barriers comment that John said. And I want to camp out here with you a little bit here because of what we're doing with Clear. Now, podcast listeners, podcast viewers, I hope you're viewing in today and getting to see Becky and I visually with our podcast. But I'm going to tell you how to get engaged with the clear growth strategy, the clear leadership trajectory that we want you on. And we'll explain all that in a little bit. Becky's running that, doing a phenomenal job. But I want to go from a content standpoint and talk about you and I and our leadership as we're building this. Now, let me be really clear with everybody. This is not a change in that John Maxwell has now written 86 books. He's given 12,000 plus speeches, and he says that every speech and every book can be synthesized to 5 categories: communication, leadership, equipping, attitude, and relationship. Communication, leadership, equipping, attitude, relationship. Clear. CLEAR. And so Becky and I have tasked ourselves to create a clear growth trajectory for any and everybody that will partner with us, and that will lead to a clear leadership enhancement for everyone that takes the journey with us. So we're on a clear growth and clear leadership passion. Becky, we think about it every day. We eat, sleep, dream. It keeps us up. It wakes us up. It's clear as on the brain. But the leadership ecosystem and the barriers to get that have been daunting, right?
Absolutely. It's easier said than done.
It is, and it's not because of a lack of vision. It's not because of a lack of excitement around a direction that will help a lot more people than we've ever helped before. It is because of the changes that are going to be required of us and the barriers to those changes.
Absolutely.
I want you to talk just a minute as a leader, and I'm almost flipping hats for a minute and going to interview you for 1 second here and go, Talk to me. You've led it massive. You've led bigger revenues than we're leading right now. Talk to us a little bit about that leader that comes in and can see all those barriers and the level of challenge that presents to someone that's tasked with bringing about the change.
Yeah, there's definitely an aspect in leadership of being capable of painting a vision. And that vision has to be wide enough that everyone that you're talking to can attach themselves to it. And as we've all experienced, it's not something you can paint just once. It's a conversation that goes on and on and on. And there's always clarifying moments to bring people back around to make sure we're all on the right track. You know, I remember a very clear conversation you and I had about clear. It's hard to get away from that, by the way. Clear,
That's right.
Clear. But in that conversation, we talked about how we knew there were going to be growing pains. And again, it's easy to say that up front, and it's a little different when you start to experience them and then start removing barriers the way that Mark has with our Clear program. But there was a very real conversation where I had said, you realize some people are not going to see the vision that we see, or it's not where they want to go. And I remember when you said, you know what, Becky, in leadership, I'm going to open the doors to the train. I'm going to invite everyone in. I'm going to tell them this euphoric place that we're going and how they can be a part of it. But whether they get on board or not is completely up to them. And I think we've seen a little bit of that.
Yeah. You know, it reminds me, Becky, and I'm so glad you're co-hosting with me today on this particular one, because the peak, the summit that we're chasing is the biggest summit that I've ever chased, taking John's legacy to this popularized message of clear growth and clear leadership. When I share, I'll never forget a year or so ago sharing with John the vision of clear. And John just weeping and saying, you were on that plane, actually, Becky, and John weeping and saying, you guys now have a vision that is bigger than anything we've done before. And then John coming on and getting exciting and saying, this is the right vision. And all of that was fun. And then sharing it with the team was fun. But you know what's not fun is a meeting you and I had just a few weeks ago when we realized that even after 12 months, we are still uncovering barriers. And I sat you and our COO, Matt, down in a meeting, just the three of us. And I said, okay, Becky, I want to know the barriers. I want to know the people barriers. I want to know the marketing barriers. I want to know the performance barriers. I want to know the lack of clarity barriers. Talk to me about the barriers in your life. And here's the teaching point, podcast family, because this almost feels like therapy between Becky and I, and y'all just showed up.
And
to be honest with you.
it kind of is, actually.
Welcome to the Maxwell Leadership Executive Podcast, where our goal is to help you increase your reputation as a leader, increase your ability to influence others, and increase your ability to fully engage your team to deliver remarkable results.